The Great Debt Paradox: who really owns the world? Picture this: the United States carries a staggering obligation, exceeding $38 trillion, a number so massive it defies comprehension. The European Union shoulders roughly $14 trillion in liabilities. Japan bears close to $9 trillion. Even nations blessed with abundant natural resources like Saudi Arabia, or manufacturing giants like Germany and China, find themselves weighed down by astronomical financial obligations. Yet here's where things get strange. When literally every nation on the planet operates in the red, we're forced to confront an uncomfortable question: if everyone's a borrower, where are all the lenders? Welcome to the Financial Historian, where we peel back the layers of money, authority, and the sweep of time. Because here's the truth: nothing in finance is ever quite what it appears to be on the surface. The hidden framework of civilization financial obligations aren't merely a problem to solve, they represent the fundamental skeleton upon which our entire modern existence is built. Every military conflict, every economic catastrophe, every period of prosperity or decline rests upon this invisible infrastructure of obligations and promises. Follow the trail of creditors far enough, and you'll stumble upon something deeply peculiar. Our planet doesn't actually owe its wealth to any specific entity. Instead, humanity owes it to humanity itself. But don't mistake this for some kind of balanced, fair arrangement. The benefits certainly don't get distributed evenly. To grasp how we arrive at this moment, a world submerged under more than $315 trillion in total obligations, nearly triple the value of everything the global economy produces, we need to journey backward through time, the birth of borrowed power long before anyone swiped plastic at a checkout counter or transferred funds with a smartphone tap. The concept of sovereign financial obligation emerged not from trading floors, but from the chaos of warfare. The year was 1694. England found itself locked in combat with France, and the royal treasury was running dangerously low on precious metals. The monarch made a desperate appeal to the merchant class for assistance, in return for a guaranteed, perpetual stream of interest income secured by future tax collections. These businessmen agreed to finance the crown's military ambitions. To oversee this groundbreaking arrangement, the Bank of England came into existence. The implications were revolutionary. For the first time, the state possessed the ability to spend resources it hadn't yet collected. Lenders, meanwhile, received something extraordinarily valuable: a government-backed commitment that could be exchanged, purchased, or transferred like any other commodity. This marked the genesis of the government bond, the tiny seed from which the entire modern financial ecosystem would eventually grow. France observed this innovation and replicated it. The Dutch refined and improved upon it. The newly formed United States embraced it to fund both its Revolutionary War and its subsequent territorial expansion across the continent. National financial obligations transformed from a symbol of weakness into a badge of trustworthiness. The capacity to borrow became synonymous with the capacity to govern effectively. Where empires once seized territories to plunder their gold reserves, they now issued bonds to harvest interest payments. The arena of conflict shifted from battlefields to ledger books. The present-day debt machine jumped ahead 300 years, and financial obligations have evolved into the world's most prolific export. The United States bears $38 trillion in obligations. Japan carries over $9 trillion. Global borrowing expands by approximately $1 trillion every 100 days or so. Every nation borrows. Every financial institution lends. Every individual citizen, through their tax contributions, retirement savings, and pension plan, simultaneously plays the role of both borrower and lender. But who actually stands on the receiving end of all these promises? Let's examine the United States first. Because American obligations aren't merely domestic, they're woven into the fabric of global finance. Of that $38 trillion mountain, roughly half qualifies as publicly held, meaning it's owed to outside investors rather than to different branches of the same government. About 2/3 of those outside investors are American entities: commercial banks, retirement funds, investment portfolios, insurance corporations, and even the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, approximately $9 trillion, rests in international hands. Japan holds the top position with around $1 trillion in American obligations. China follows with approximately $800 billion. The United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Belgium round out the list. So when commentators claim America is indebted to China, they're technically accurate, but that represents only about 2% of the total picture. The overwhelming majority of American obligations are owed to Americans themselves. The Treasury Department creates bonds. Domestic banks and funds purchase them. The Federal Reserve frequently buys them back, conjuring new currency in the process. American taxpayers fund the interest on those bonds, which then flows into American retirement accounts. It's a self-referential loop. The obligations are genuine, but the creditor is largely a mirror image of the same system. The global merry-go-round, this circular structure, isn't uniquely American. It's planetary in scale. Japan extends credit to the United States through Treasury purchases. The U.S. extends credit to Europe through International Monetary Fund mechanisms. Europe extends credit to developing economies through World Bank programs. Those developing nations then extend credit back to advanced economies by parking their foreign currency reserves in Western bonds. It's an international game of musical chairs, except the chairs are constructed entirely from commitments. Every country clutches someone else's promise. Every guarantee is backed by another guarantee. Imagine a poker game where every participant has borrowed chips from the person sitting next to them, and the only principle keeping the game running is that nobody can afford to walk away from the table. The invisible power brokers. But there's another layer, perhaps the most influential of all: the markets themselves. Behind every government bond exists a complex network of organizations, hedge funds, pension administrators, sovereign wealth managers, and central banking authorities controlling tens of trillions in collective assets. These entities serve as the true judges of creditworthiness. They determine which nations can borrow at favorable rates and which must pay premium prices just to survive. When their confidence wavers, currencies crumble, administrations topple, and entire economies can be reorganized overnight. Democratic processes decide who governs. Financial markets decide who survives. The ultimate architect of this arrangement, the modern high priest presiding over this temple of obligations, is the central bank. Central banking institutions don't merely oversee financial obligations, they actively manufacture them. Each time the Federal Reserve or European Central Bank purchases government bonds, it generates fresh currency in exchange. The liability on one institution's books transforms into an asset on another's. Every dollar in circulation embodies a unit of obligation somewhere else in the system. There's no such thing as obligation-free currency. Every coin, every banknote, every digital dollar carries an invisible IOU etched into its very essence. The confidence gamma. For decades, this loop has perpetuated itself through one critical ingredient: confidence. As long as investors maintain faith that governments will service interest payments, even if the principal amount never gets repaid, the machinery continues operating. But what occurs when that confidence trembles? We've witnessed it before. In Greece during 2010, the government's obligations became mathematically impossible to service. Bondholders panicked. Interest rates skyrocketed. The European Central Bank and IMF stepped in with emergency funding, but their rescue package arrived with brutal conditions attached: severe austerity measures, tax increases, spending reductions, and widespread unemployment. For an entire generation of Greeks, bailout became synonymous with suffering. Argentina has experienced repeated defaults that transformed financial obligations into a national nightmare. Sri Lanka recently endured fuel shortages and political disintegration after the government exhausted its foreign currency reserves needed to service international loans. When the system fractures, the creditors suddenly materialize with faces and demands. The IMF representatives arrive. The rating agencies issue their judgments. The anonymous bondholders, who effectively control entire nations through financial leverage, make their presence known. Yet even following collapse, the identical logic restarts itself. Fresh loans replace expired ones. Previous obligations get restructured with new terms. The machine reboots with a different name attached to essentially the same balance sheet. The eternal subscription model. Here's why. In the 21st century, sovereign financial obligations aren't designed for repayment. They're engineered for perpetual renewal. Contemporary governments don't actually intend to eliminate their obligations. Not currently, not ever. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's deliberate policy architecture. When you or I secure a loan, lenders expect us to repay the borrowed amount. But governments operate under fundamentally different rules. They treat obligations like a subscription service that automatically renews, issuing fresh bonds to retire maturing ones, a mechanism economists term refinancing. Interest payments become the actual product being sold, the recurring fee charged for maintaining stability. The global economy now fundamentally depends on that continuous fee stream, like a shark that must maintain constant motion to keep oxygen flowing through its gills. Today's international financial system runs on confidence in future payments, not on any expectation of full repayment. The United States will never eliminate its $38 trillion obligation. It will refinance it indefinitely. Japan has been rolling over its obligations for decades, now exceeding the 150% of its GDP. Yet Japanese government bond interest rates remain near zero. Investors aren't waiting to recover their principal. They're waiting to renew the arrangement. Why would they behave this way? Because for these investors, government obligations represent the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't perceived as a liability, it's viewed as an asset. The very foundation supporting global financial markets. Pension funds hold these instruments. Banks pledge them as security for other transactions. Central banks treat them as equivalent to currency itself. The system fundamentally depends on governments never fully repaying their obligations. Because if they somehow did, the world would lose its most trusted financial instrument. The impossible solution: imagine if Washington somehow decided to pay down every last dollar of its obligations. Financial institutions and funds worldwide would suddenly lose their most stable asset category. The dollar supply would contract dramatically, triggering deflationary spirals and economic collapse. Eliminating the obligations would destroy the very mechanism that allows the economy to function. Governments therefore do the opposite. They continue issuing more, not recklessly or chaotically, but with careful rhythm and precision. The obligations become analogous to a heartbeat for capitalism itself, pulsing through every pension plan, mortgage agreement, and market transaction on Earth. This explains why political rhetoric about balancing budgets or paying down national obligations amounts to selling an illusion. The genuine objective isn't eliminating obligations. It's maintaining them at sustainable, serviceable levels while keeping them attractive enough that the system never stops believing in their value. Because once that belief evaporates, the numerical values become irrelevant. Confidence collapses, interest rates spike upward, and an economy constructed entirely on rolling promises grinds to a complete halt. The hidden transfer, that's the genuine secret of sovereign financial obligations. The strategy was never about repayment. The strategy centers on keeping the world convinced that repayment remains possible. It's a closed circuit of trust. As long as that trust maintains its integrity, the numerical figures can expand indefinitely. But trust doesn't distribute itself evenly across society. When we claim we owe it to ourselves, that's only partially accurate. Interest payments don't flow democratically throughout the population. They flow upward from taxpayers and workers toward the institutions and investors that hold the obligations. In other words, these financial structures aren't merely transfers between nations. They represent transfers between economic classes. This explains why global wealth concentration and global indebtedness rise in tandem. The system rewards those who own obligations and penalizes those who merely service them through their labor and taxes. If this pattern sounds familiar, it's because you're witnessing the same fundamental story scaled upward. From individual households to nations, from nations to the entire planet. The pyramid's peak creditors aren't villains in this narrative. Debtors aren't innocent victims. They represent two essential components of the same engine driving modern civilization forward. The genuine problem emerges when this engine runs short on fuel, when fresh borrowing can no longer keep pace with commitments made in previous years and decades. That's when the abstract question, who holds the other end of the rope, transforms into something intensely personal and immediate. Because at the apex of this global pyramid, you won't find a single face to blame. It isn't China. It isn't Wall Street. It isn't the International Monetary Fund. It's all of them simultaneously, and it's us as well. The contemporary financial system has fundamentally transformed obligations themselves into currency. Governments issue them, banking institutions multiply them, investors trade them like commodities, and ordinary citizens depend on them for their economic survival. The boundary between borrower and lender has blurred beyond recognition. Financial obligations once signified bondage and servitude. Today, they signify balance and stability. But if that precarious balance ever tips decisively, if confidence fractures beyond repair, the illusion dissolves, and we'll remember what these obligations truly represent. Promises that cannot possibly be honored forever. If this perspective shifted something in your understanding, subscribe for more. History holds the answers to our present moment. I'll show you exactly where to look.